I saw in that moment what I'd been doing to myself, that it was what was going on in my head that was causing all of my now physical symptoms that were getting worse and worse. And I remember right before that, the thing that scared me the most, I was at the mall with my 3 kids, 4, 2, and newborn. And this would happen often, but this is like my illustrative example. I came to in the mall, not like woke up out of the sleep, but was just like, where are we? And that was happening all the time. I couldn't remember dressing them. I couldn't remember getting them in the car. I couldn't remember any of that.
Right.
And losing the ends of moments, like getting off the phone with, I don't even remember who it was. Did I hang up on my mom? Who was that? Like, no names, no recollection, the worst of the worst brain fog.
Welcome back to the Smarter Not Harder podcast, your home for 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. I'm your host again today. My name is Dr. Scott Sherr, and it's a pleasure to be back with all of you. Today's podcast was a little bit of a different tack than usual, but extremely, extremely important when it comes to clinical care. I had a fantastic lady on. Her name is Karen DiMarco. Karen is a fantastic human. She is an RN for over 25 years. She's been in the ICU, ER, air ambulance. She's made her own companies over the years as well, working in private industry. Her current company she developed in 2020 is called Renegades, or renegade.pro. It's free edutaining, as she likes to say, getting continuing education credits for nurses while they watch podcasts and they get other media inside their ecosystem. But this podcast was really focused on some of the work that she had done earlier in her own personal health journey, conducting and publishing research, the APA Journal of Spirituality and Clinical Practice, and co-developed the Foundations of Health program. The reason why I want to bring Karen on is actually I was on her podcast not too long ago, the Renegades podcast, and what we talked about there was that there's such a huge challenge with healing if there's a psychosocial emotional component that's not being addressed overall. And so Karen's research was really based on this. And so here's a bit of a summary as to what we spoke about during the podcast. So Karen shares her personal journey from a conventional nursing background to becoming a private patient advocate. She discusses the psychosocial factors that impact health, particularly in chronic fatigue syndrome, in her own case, and how her own struggle led to explore the connection between thought and health. And we talked about many metaphors throughout all of this, which was a lot of fun. We delved into the design of a study that examined the effects of consciousness and thought on recovery, emphasizing the importance of understanding one's thoughts and their impact on physical health. In this conversation, we also discussed intricate relationship between thoughts, emotions, and healing, and the understanding one's thoughts and the biochemistry behind chronic illness, emphasizing the role of perspective in healing. And Karen's emphasis on the biochemistry aspect of things, the cell danger response, was super cool overall. We also touched on the potential of psychedelics and therapy and concluded with practical advice on living smarter, not harder, of course, as we do on every single podcast. So this is a very special podcast for me because it's very evident after being in practice as many years as I have that there's certain people that you can help right away with vitamins, minerals, nutrients, supplements, dietary changes, lifestyle things. But if there's a significant psychosocial emotional component, the mindset, the well-being of the mind and the aspects of the mind can overshadow everything else. It's not that we're saying that everything's in your head for people. That is for sure. But there's a huge psychological component that if not addressed, people just can't heal. They can't get out of that fight or flight as well. So I hope you like this podcast with Karen DiMarco. It was a fantastic one to record. If you did, don't forget to please like and subscribe below so you never miss an episode. Enjoy. All right, Karen, it's so great to have you on the podcast. How are you today?
I'm admittedly a little nervous. It's been a while since, I'm always the host and not the hostee. So,
Yeah. I know that it can be a little challenging sometimes to be on the other side of the mic. When I first started hosting podcasts, it was very nerve-wracking for me because I was used to having people ask me questions and not having to ask the questions itself. But I think it could be fun. And you and I, so Karen, you have a fantastic podcast already. It's called Renegades, and you have a huge nursing group, like an ecosystem that you've developed. And I think it's amazing. And so I was on your podcast not too long ago, and we were talking about sort of the psychosocial emotional aspects of healing. And, you had this amazing story and also a paper that you had written about this. And the framework for clinicians that are listening is that the piece that we really were kind of diving into a lot during your podcast, Karen, was the idea that there are a lot of people that we can't help initially with medicine or with supplements or with diet or lifestyle, even because they have these sort of psychosocial emotional challenges that will prevent anything from getting better or as well as they want to get better overall. And then you're like, well, I have this paper, I have this story. And so I'd love to kind of dig into maybe your personal story first and kind of how that colored and evolved into the paper that you wrote. And then we can talk about the physiology and the everything else that goes along with it. But how about you tell us a little bit about yourself, Karen, and how we got here?
All right. That's my background's in nursing. I went to University of Michigan, graduated with honors, all that blah, blah, blah. But really, I did very well at going into career that I got into because my mom told me to, which is actually part of the story. I became a nurse because my mom told me to.
Sure.
But sitting there on my back porch during graduation, crying, I'm like, I don't want to be a nurse. But then I kind of picked myself up, dusted myself off. I'm like, all right. If I'm going to be a nurse, I'm going to be a super nurse. Like, I want people to picture me walking toward them in slow motion in a flight suit with an Aerosmith song playing in the background. You know? So that's where I went.
Nice. You went like almost Wayne's World on the Dreamweaver thing. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
nice.
There weren't, all I wanted to do was ICU or trauma nursing. Got my original license in Ohio where I grew up. And there were no, you couldn't get in as a new grad. So I covered my eyes and pinned the tail on the donkey style in front of a map of the Southwest. My finger landed on Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I went out there, and that was my first cardiothoracic ICU job as a new grad. Within a year, I was training to do air ambulance. I was one of the youngest nurses. So I was always like, bigger, better, faster. If anybody told me you're too young, there's no way you can do that, I was like, oh yeah, hold my beer, But that was actually part of the imagery of how I wanted everybody to perceive me. Was started when I was old enough to learn language. I had these 3 older brothers who were a nightmare to follow in my family. My middle brother, for example, Mike, is a microvascular facial plastic surgeon, one of the best in the world. He's taken surgeries that take, 12, 14 and whittled them down to 4. And, photographic memory. He'll put his shoes on the wrong feet, but, always setting the curve, blah, blah. But they were all like that, very athletic. So for some reason, when I was little, it's amazing that any of us get through our adolescence alive. But my most painful memories and my most painful things in my childhood were when my big brothers would leave me alone. I was behind. We are latchkey kids. My parents my mom was a nurse actually. In my family are either in produce or medicine. That's yeah. Kind of split down the middle.
Okay.
And I just didn't want them. So I made up in my head, in order to not get left behind in life by my brothers, by anyone, and noticed and paid any attention as the youngest of 4, I had to be liked. And then I made up, in order to be liked, I had to be thin. I had to be pretty. I had to be smart. I had to be witty. I had to be the best athlete, the best, blah. So, and in order to do that, I made up all of these boxes I had to check in order to be thin, in order to be witty, So my life became this algorithm that started, I'm skipping over a lot, but for efficiency's sake, and by the time I was 37, had, married 2 kids or 3 kids at the time, all of that all day long hypervigilance for what people thought of me so that I wouldn't get left behind became 90%. Rented a warehouse, eating disorders, suicidal ideation. But I was raised strict Catholic, so I'd never do it, which was probably what saved my life a lot, because far be it for me to bring shame upon my family for eternity by doing that, so.
Sure.
But it was always subdued under the surface, because if anybody knew the struggles and the turmoil, I might get left behind. Well, by the age of 37, diagnoses of, I'd just been through a functional medicine training. I kind of spit myself out of the conventional medicine system because I wanted to be a private patient advocate. And part of that program I went through was with the University of Arizona, specifically for nurses, ICU and trauma and, the kind of critical care genre of nursing.
Sure.
Went through this program, learned all about, I thought I was going to go into this program to learn like the business and legal ins and outs of being a private patient advocate, but that was 10% of it. It was epigenetics, nutrigenomics, system biology, all of the things that point to root cause. And up until that time, that was in 2011, I was getting sicker and sicker and more fatigued, and my brain was just not functioning. And after my third kid, I lost the weight, but I could never had the energy to exercise and move anymore. The thing that I liked most about myself was how my brain would put, supposedly unrelated things together, often complex information, because that's what I did as a patient advocate. It was like distill complex, functional, integrative information for patients to understand. And then when I would teach that, but the worse I got, the more tired I got, the more brain fogged I got, the more I'd hide it. And then there was another layer of hypervigilance about, oh my gosh, what if people find out that I'm weak? All these stories in my head. Yeah. So part of that program, the thing that intrigued me most, that I really wanted to develop an expertise in, was neuroadrenal testing, analysis, supplementation, that kind of thing. Because one of the lecturers at that program was from neuroscience, and I was like, my mind was blown. It was like went in thinking the world was flat, and somebody showed me a satellite picture, why doesn't everybody know this?
Yeah.
So when I got back, I lived in Philadelphia at the time. I got back to Philadelphia, and right after I got back, there was this, just to give you an example of how bad my brain fog was, and Lyme disease, diagnosed, because I was secretly going to integrative doctors to figure out how can I get back my mojo so that I continue to, overachieve to maintain what everybody thought about me.
Totally.
So I found a mentor, one of the, it was relatively new science. This was in 2011, not new, but, just kind of up and coming. And he was a Center for Bioindividualized Medicine, Dr. Jess Armine, and he agreed to kind of mentor me. And I was my first client. So we did my test. We looked at it together, and I'm kind of, and first thing he says to me is, "You're faking it." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I remember my armpits started getting all pinchy, and I started like getting cold sweats. Oh my gosh, he's found out. He's, I've been found out. He's like, "Karen," very gently, he's like, "I have patients with tests that are 50% better than yours, and they're catatonically depressed, can't get out of bed, bedbound often, they're sick all the time, suicidal." Like, he just went through the list of, because he'd done thousands and thousands of these tests and clients. He's like,
"Sure,
what's really going on?" And I lost it, like absolutely lost it. I don't even remember the end of the call, but he gently said, let's regroup tomorrow. And I saw in that moment what I'd been doing to myself, that it was what was going on in my head that was causing all of my now physical symptoms that were getting worse and worse. And I remember right before that, the thing that scared me the most, I was at the mall with my 3 kids, 4, 2, and newborn. That's the ages.
Yeah.
And this would happen often, but this is like my illustrative example. I came to in the mall, not like woke up out of the sleep, but was just like, where are we? Like, and that was happening all the time. I couldn't remember dressing them. I couldn't remember getting them in a car. I couldn't remember any of that.
Right.
And losing the ends of moments, like getting off the phone with, I don't even remember who it was. Did I hang up on my mom? Who was that? Like, no names, no recollection, the worst of the worst of brain fog. So then I saw that test, and I was like, I learned my favorite prayer that day, surrendered in a puddle of snot and tears on the floor of my master bedroom closet. May I swear on your program? It's in a prayerful swearing. It was fucking. I was so afraid that if I would actually die, if somebody didn't like me or was disappointed in me, or if I couldn't maintain this facade anymore, which I obviously couldn't, it was killing me. It was like a choice. Either I jump off the cliff, convinced I would be divorced, my parents would disown me, my children, nobody, I would have no friends, I would be left alone if I didn't keep up this ruse.
Yeah. Did you have an awareness, Karen, that you were doing this, that you were creating this whole sort of whole life that was not what you were sort of aligned with, in the sense of like the things that you were worried about, like, or was this something that took time later to understand? Like, now in retrospect, what you were doing, right? You were pretending as all the things that you just described, right? Yeah. But was it obvious to you at that point that you were doing this, or was it something that came out later, that you were actually having this disconnect on how you were acting versus how you felt? Pardon the interruption. This episode is brought to you by Transcriptions, makers of precision-dosed, physician-formulated, and pharmaceutical-grade formulas in the form of a buccal troche. For this episode, check out our Tromune. This is our high-potency extract of the cordyceps mushroom, cordycepin. It is 100 times more potent as an immune system activator, as an anti-infective, and increases your deep sleep. Check it out at transcriptions.com and save 10% on your order by using code podcast10 at checkout. Now back to the show.
Prior to the puddle and snot and tears moment, that's just what it felt like to be Karen. I had no awareness. I mean, I knew I was exhausted, but the thought of not keeping up what I was doing, I didn't even have the thought, I have to keep this up. It's just what it felt like to be Karen.
Right, exactly.
But when I saw that test, it was, this is what you're doing to yourself. And so to answer your question, after that, it was like all the pieces started coming together.
I see.
But
if somebody had told you before that, like if they said to you a year ago, you know, Karen, you have chronic fatigue, you have Lyme disease, like all these things, this is all in your head, would you have believed them, kind of thing, right? Not all, I mean, not obviously all in your head, but like in the sense of like...
Well, I got those diagnoses and then it went right into women, many women your age, you know, that kind of thing. It was not explained away by... living on red alert for what people thought of me or whatever. And that's just because I don't think that most practitioners don't understand that's what's doing. It's organic. It's many women your age. It's chronic Lyme disease. And this is a comorbidity, you know, or whatever. But what happened after that moment where I just kind of like, I'm just going to be alone. And then I started supplementing, you know, I started doing some life according to what, you know, I said I was my first client. So it was like all of everything, both all my sympathetic, parasympathetic, you know, the neurotransmitters associated with everything. Cortisol was absolutely flatlined in the toilet. So just started learning as I started supplementing and taking care of myself. And I didn't realize until 2017, where when we started the study, about 2015 was when we started talking about the study, my partner and I, which a similar thing happened to him. I didn't realize that the supplementation and everything was a very small part, if anything, to do with my recovery, because 3 weeks after that puddle of snot and tears moment, I remember driving in my car and looking at the clock, and it was 4:00 p.m. and it just hit me. Oh my God, I'm not tired. Not only, and then I'm like, oh my God, I haven't even thought about food for 3 weeks. And all of this kind of retrospective awakening to in those 3 weeks of repeating my prayer, fuck it. It was like this radical remission. I could think, I had my mojo back. So I always wrote it off to the supplements and the lifestyle changes and all that. And meanwhile, I started helping other people. So I started, because I thought that this was fantastic. I'm cured, I'm healed. And started doing hundreds of these tests on other people and learning so much. And I was so excited about the science. But what I later found out, and I'll kind of skip to the start of the study, I met my partner in the study, John. He lives in the UK. He had a similar experience as I did, kind of different entryway in. But he was telling me, Karen, you had all this success, because doesn't have a medical background. He was just like a coach and was trained in this. Then he had his own kind of radical remission experience and then started helping other people to see what he saw. But he had no medical background, which was actually a benefit to both of us in the study, because he's the one who convinced me. How long did you take those supplements? And I was like, 30 days. And then I stopped taking them because I was feeling so much better. And he's like, and how many people that you've gone on to help maintain, you know, the outcome without the supplements? I'm like, I have no idea. I didn't follow up specifically. I just assumed. And he's like, what if it wasn't the supplements? Because that's not what it is for any of my clients. Right. So we kind of just had this back and forth. I wasn't ready to believe him yet. Mm-hmm. And I'm not discounting that supplementate, like the targeted supplementation to kind of counterbalance and help getting you past the whitewater. Sure. I'm not discounting that at all, but he was having the same results, if not better than I was with clients. He couldn't test, he couldn't supplement, he didn't know anything about that, but he was having these miraculous, like people who were homebound, bedbound, sick for 20 years, whatever. And I was having similar results myself. So we were outside a conference, and there was this call at the conference for people to do more research in psychoneuroendoimmunology and, kind of stuff, like from this three principles perspective that's discussed in the study. And John, by the third day of a conference, Scott, I am loitering in the lobby, like just eating the snacks. Like I can't pay attention for that long. But John came out of this lecture about research and he's like, we should do a study. I'm like, right, we should. What do we do? I've never done a study. He's like, I don't know, but let's prove this. Let's show that this works in bulk instead of on these one-to-one anecdotal things.
Right.
So he and I, with no research experience whatsoever, except for me reading and research, reading articles. I've never conducted a study myself, but we recruited. We decided to do it because our major diagnosis was chronic fatigue syndrome, ME,
right.
As it's referred to in the
Right.
UK.
Mm-hmm.
We recruited, and even the recruiting process, because one of the things that you and I talked about when you were on my podcast is this identification with diagnosis for a lot of people, which is sometimes not, well, oftentimes is not helpful. It's a relief at first because they know something's wrong, but these diagnoses of exclusion often limit or even exacerbate the issue. So even in the recruiting process, we saw that people were even you just put out on Facebook, it's just, we've had these kinds of results. Here's some testimonials. We want to do this study. Come and join us if you're called to. But the venom, man, we got so much, people were so angry that we would even suggest that this was something. And we weren't saying it's all in your head.
Right.
And throughout the study, it's not. But what we are saying is what goes on in your head has a profound effect on your biology.
Yeah.
And
I'm not surprised you got a lot of flack for it.
Yeah. We finally got, I think it was about 100 initially. Then we told them what the study involved. No testing, no supplementation, no medications, no nothing. And everybody, we were left with 22 people.
Okay.
So we're like, hey, for two inexperienced researchers, this is probably, perfect for us. We did a control group, an experimental group, and it was an 8-week study. And the results that we had were so unbelievable. We were pinching ourselves the whole time. I mean, and I'll stop there because that's kind of like my personal story, my way in. And if you want to talk about, anything else about the study or even what surrounds like the cell danger response is another thing that we talked about when you were on my podcast and the 3 things that make us sick. I mean, it just makes so much sense, but it's almost, people are, it's egregiously underrepresented how much the psychology plays in recovery and healing.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to talk about all those things in various ways. I think something you and I spoke about on your podcast as well, and I alluded to earlier, is that oftentimes if you've been in practice for a long period of time, which I would say I have been at this point, it's pretty obvious to me within about 30 seconds to a minute, if I'm going to be able to help that person directly with the work that I typically do, or if they really do need some psychological support while we would do that work, or even before we would do the work that I would typically do. And it's not, the supplements can help, and the supplements can definitely be a way in for people. But the problem is that oftentimes if there's like a significant psychosocial emotional aspect to it, you just don't see that shift with the supplements, with the diet, with the lifestyle, until you start seeing some of the shifts like psychosocially, emotionally. And like you said, Karen, it's not just that we're saying to people that this is just in their head. Like there are physical symptoms, there are inflammatory issues, and these are things are happening. And that's absolutely the case. And then the disease recognition is helpful, I guess, like you said initially for some people, but then it becomes like, I have this disease. I am this disease. Like this is me. I am a disease, of whatever it might be. So your story is very, I think, it's a very good example of what can happen when we shift that psychology. But of course, you were taking supplements and other things were part of it. So when you were designing this study, talk to me about like how you designed it. Like, so I love it. So like no supplements, no drugs. Like this is this is going to be very, very different than the average, chronic fatigue study. So talk to me about the study design and maybe some of the principles that went into that design too. I know that you were very big on those too.
Basically, we're trying to prove radical remission that, I'm not saying this was chronic fatigue, but one part of the research that went into the study was radical remission from cancer, from heart disease, from people near-death experiences. Like this is the rabbit hole that I was down at this time, trying to explain what happened to me and what happened to, what is the biochemistry? What is the physics behind like all of these stories of radical remission?
Mm-hmm.
So for John and I, it was kind of like an awakening. For me, it was that puddle of snot and tears moment. For him, it was kind of like a one day kind of thing too, an insight based recovery. And the people he worked with, sometimes it was just working with them so that they could see. So it was an 8-week study, and it's like the 10,000 keys that all open the same door. What insight can show people that their experience is coming from their thinking? Our consciousness and our power of thought is what shapes our everyday experience. And depending on the way you were raised, your genetics, your upregulation and downregulation and what it is in the moment too, and how that stuff, that's going to shape how you experience every moment of every day. And you're only one thought away of a completely different experience. I often can be heard saying everything's better when the sun comes up. And dispelling, myths like you shouldn't go to bed angry. You should absolutely go to bed angry because you won't be angry in the morning. And that's a much better time, those kinds of things. Sure. So it was 8 weeks of opportunities. These people got, 45 to 60-minute video where we would explain certain concepts. And then we would have a call a week. And then they each had like 2 one-to-one coaching sessions to bring the concepts, to kind of deepen their understanding and individualize them for each contestant. On the study.
These participants, yes.
Yeah. And it was some people, before we got to even the first call of the week, the first week's call, saw something and woke up. There was, for example, this one, she got a strep virus, and then she was already very stressed out, 3 young kids, very active mom, got a virus and then never recovered, and then went on red alert. Oh my gosh, I have to get better because I have to take care of this kids. And then constant, like, on red alert and hypervigilant about any symptoms. And am I getting better today or worse today? And she kept getting further and further fatigued, and then started getting infections that she couldn't recover. You've had, I'm sure you recognize the course. Yes. She heard something. I don't remember what it was, because we had all these various concepts that we often talk about. But for her, I think it was, there's a difference between, you can be tired and still have energy. True and unrelated. That tiredness does not equal not enough energy. That simple thing. For instance, I don't know if that was a specific one for her, but she saw that so deeply that even before we got to the first call, she was out playing badminton, where for 3 years prior to that, she barely had enough energy. Occasionally, a couple days a week, she would meet her kids at the bus stop, and that's all she had energy for. So then she was like whitewater rafting within a month, and badminton. So, and then there was another guy on the second, because we did the experimental group, and then we weren't going to say to the control group, okay, thanks for your time, bye. Then we ran a study again for the control group. And after the first 8-week study, we were like, what is happening? Like, we knew we had these one-to-one, successes with people, but this was 11 people who all got better and nothing else that they'd tried. One woman was sick for 40 years, homebound, bedbound for 40 years, diagnosed when she was 26, came on the study when she was 66, and after the study, she was driving across the UK to go see an old friend. On the second, so when we were doing the control group, there was a guy who, I think he hadn't climbed a flight of stairs since 2007, had been in a wheelchair since 2011, not from any kind of spinal injury or whatever, just atrophied, chronic fatigue.
Sure.
Halfway through the study, he was taking video of himself standing on a skateboard, pushing himself back and forth.
Amazing.
And so the design of the study was just the 10,000 keys that all open the door that we're hoping to open for them, so they recognize thought and how it's the thought that's creating their experience, and the very powerful downstream oxidative stress that comes with misusing the power of thinking and using it for hypervigilance and trying to control their body, which is not their job.
Pardon the interruption. This episode is brought to you by Health Optimization Medicine and Practice Association, a nonprofit organization training practitioners how to optimize health rather than treat disease. For this episode, check out our Exposomics module. This is our module all about toxins on our environment. Our environment is just chock full of these. We have to understand how to understand their role in the body, what's happening, what's going on with our cells, how we can test, how we can correct. This is what we do at Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. Go to homehope.org and save 10% on this module or any module of our certification course by using code podcast10 at checkout. Now back to the show. Yeah, wow, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I was looking at your study and you talk about innate health in there. You talk about the misuse of thought as well. Do you have any comments on those? These are big principles that you were using as ways to structure and to actually execute the study itself. And I think it might be helpful because obviously you had done your own research to get here and to use this kind of framework. So any thoughts about those or anything that might be interesting to share?
I can give a quick metaphor to that. Because it's not essential. I mean, the only thing that was essential to the study, the efficacy of the study, was that people understood that their experience came from their thought. And the reason that they could recognize their thought was because they're conscious. I mean, that's as simple as I can put it.
I love that. Okay, that's perfect. Yeah. I mean, that's so universal
metaphor,
as you can get, but that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And as because I could speak like for 8 hours straight about it. It's trying to throw paint over the invisible man. It's like it's just becoming aware that this is actually where our experience is coming from. And I'll often give the example of you're at a stoplight and there's two cars in front of you and there's a homeless guy in the corner. So you're watching two different people. So we live and ride around in these virtual reality suits, the biochemistry of emotion, and our biochemistry that gives us emotion comes from our virtual reality goggles. What colors our goggles is our genetics, the way we were raised, our clergy, our media, our culture, our language, Right. So that's what colors the goggles that you look at the world through. So one person's in a car and so there's two cars, and on the corner, you see a hand come out of the car window and hand a couple bucks to the homeless guy.
Okay.
One person's going to look at that and go, sucker, just going to buy more drugs, And what's the biochemistry of those emotions? You got cortisol, you got epinephrine, you got norepinephrine, you got all these catechol, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The person behind that looks at that and goes, oh, and might be inspired to do the same thing. And what are those? Serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, whatever. Same experience, same reality to completely different biochemical experiences of that reality. So consciousness colors our goggles, and thought, the quality of our thinking depends on the quality of our goggles. And you can wipe your goggles, you can change the color. And usually that happens automatically when your thought and your mind clears and settles.
I love that. And so how do you teach them to do that? Like, what are the ways that you just giving them the awareness that there exists a place that they don't have to believe everything that they believe, everything that they think, and just giving them time in that space? I mean, the way I think about this, and I was listening to a meditation teacher talk about this not too long ago. He's a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and he would have people that came in that wanted to kill themselves. And he would say to them, okay, I understand you want to kill yourself, but is there a part of you that doesn't want to kill yourself? And they'd be like, maybe it's like a small little part, but like, well, who's observing both parts of you right there? How can you both want to kill yourself and not kill yourself at the same time? Are you really that person that wants to kill yourself, right? Or are you something that's observing both of those thoughts that, yes, I want to kill myself and I'm having all the perseveration related to that, but there's something about additional piece of you that doesn't believe that, right? Yeah. So I think like that's the power of, the perspective shift, right? Is that something similar to what you're describing?
Yes, it's metaphorical, exactly that. And I'm sure we use something very similar. Yeah. It's lots of metaphors to wake them up to the part that they're not the thinker. Yes. They're the listener of the thought. But we are raised to believe our whole life until our death that the words in our heads are our own.
Yeah, that we create everything. I mean, I have this conversation with my kids like almost every day at this point, especially I have a 7-year-old and he's just getting to that point where, he's transitioning from being a kid to being like an older kid that has an ego and that knows who he is and like knows the date and the time. And it's like a magical, but strangely terrible time for him because he doesn't know what's real in his brain, what's not real. So we have these conversations like almost every day about how thoughts just arise, that we all have crazy fucking thoughts all the time about everything, and we don't have to believe them, right? So this is what's happening in people that are chronically sick, right? They have these perseverating thoughts like you did, right? And I'm sure that you experience with other people that you work with.
Yeah. And using metaphors to not only help people wake up to their own thinking, but to also explain the biochemistry is essential to their healing, because that's kind of what gives it the credibility.
Yeah.
So John's part, he was more the coaching, the psychology side, and I was the one who kind of brought it home to the biology. And one of the metaphors I used, which might be helpful, I stole this off of the spiritual teacher Muji, which I thought was just brilliant. But it's, we use so many metaphors throughout the 8 weeks that people started referring to one thing. I had a bus rush the other day. I'll explain what a bus rush means. So I listened to this, one of Muji's satsangs once, and he gave this metaphor that you are the tour guide for your favorite city. And you're taking all these people on a bus tour. So people come on the bus, you might like them, you might not and your experience of the tour is colored by the passengers who come on the bus. Now you're a good customer service. So when they come on the bus, you're like, hey, best seats are in the back. You might chit chat, what's your name? Where are you from? But you're not going to memorize those things. You're not because it's a 2-hour bus tour. They're getting off in 2 hours. So the people come on the bus, you glad hand, you're not going to go, what's your last name? Where did you come from? Because the more you do that, it's just like busy, and you have to, then there's all this pressure to remember their names, and you're not going to see them again in 2 hours. So who cares? But what we tend to do, passengers are thoughts. The passengers come on the bus and they get off the bus. That's how the system is designed to work. But what we're trained to do is, say anxiety comes on the bus. It's like, oh my God. Okay. Anxiety is here. I have to take this medication or read this course or take this, or do this course or to get anxiety off the bus. Anxiety is getting off the bus all on anxiety's own in about 2 hours. And then you trap anxiety on the bus, trying to figure out how to get it off the bus. And then depression comes on, and then a symptom and tiredness. And now you've got anxiety, depression, and fatigue having an orgy in the back. And then they start having babies, and the bus gets heavy. And then, you can't figure out how to get all of these passengers off the bus, and the bus gets overloaded, and then it needs maintenance. And then it starts breaking down, when if you just let them off, they're going to get off on their own, and the bus, but we're actually not the tour guide. We're the bus. We are the container for all these experiences. And just like your wound on your finger is designed to heal without you doing a course or taking a medication, you don't sit there and try to help it. You don't sit there and try to help your gut digest your food. But we think when we tend to get these diagnoses, whether it's like, mood related, insomnia, anxiety, depression, whatever, we take on the role of fixing that. But we don't think to take on the role of fixing a cut on our finger. Actually, if we get in the way, we'll probably make it worse, and it'll take longer to heal. Well, that's exactly what's happening. So that's just an example of one metaphor we use to show people you don't have to, just like a snow globe. That's a kind of a cliche metaphor. A lot of people, right? You don't tilt the snow globe to try to get it to settle. It settles on its own. So just that gives people freedom with their fatigue, with their symptoms, with their anxiety, without having to find freedom from those symptoms in order to feel peace and well-being.
That's wonderfully said. I love the snow globe analogy for a number of different reasons. You're not, not just the boy or the girl in the snow globe, you're the snow globe itself, right? And the idea can be used in various ways in that capacity. And the bus is a fantastic one. I love the tour bus. And I love that at the end there, you said that you're not actually the tour guide, you're actually the bus. And that's important too. There's nobody leading the thoughts in charge, that there's no self, there's no ego to do all that, right? That's all an illusion as well. And so that's something you learn when you do more of these exercises or do, practice meditation, which can be difficult because, as you said, Karen, I had a patient just yesterday talking about this. He's trying so hard to get better. so hard that he has to relax. If you don't relax, nothing's going to get better. And then this is where I'd like to take the conversation now, which is you had the opportunity to talk about the biochemistry. So let's talk about that, right? Because how did you weave that in from a conversational perspective, but what also is happening here from a biochemistry perspective? And you alluded to the cell danger response, I know. So let's go into that, because that's going to be really interesting for us to listen to dive into too.
Yeah, well, basically, I'll just kind of explain it the way I explained it to the participants on the study so that they can understand it. I know your audience is much, have forgotten probably more than I know, but in a way, there's three things that make us sick: environmental, physical, environmental, and psychological. The body, the immune system, our detoxification systems are incredibly, miraculously adept at detoxifying and getting rid of some things. And sometimes it needs some support and a little bit of help.
Sure. Yeah.
But the psychology, an overactive, hypervigilant psychology, will not only prevent the immune system from detoxifying, because all that energy that's going into the fight or flight and the sympathetic response to save our asses, if it's on all the time, like, you're got the pedal to the metal with the parking brake on, it wears down everything else, and it prevents it. All that energy goes to the psychology and wears down the immune system and prevents us from detoxifying and fighting infection, microbial infections and all that stuff. And if it doesn't stop, then the psychology can create massive amounts of oxidative stress and cause inflammation. And depending on your genetic Achilles heel, it's going to turn up as chronic fatigue or depression or cancer, right? And depending on how long it goes. So that's kind of my explanation for them to the cell danger response. That's why the psychology is the linchpin, because your immune system, and that's why a lot of people in the study, all they had to do was have that massive insight, recognize the power of thought, and not even have to do it. And that's another kind of pitfall. Once you recognize thought, people tend to think that they have to do something about it. Well, trying to control your thoughts is like trying to push up the rain. You just can't do it. They come in, like clouds in the sky, another cliche. And when you try to make those things go away, that also creates a fight or flight response. Like, I love to give the Ultradian cycle. You have that every 90 to a 20, the Ultradian rhythm, every 90 to 120 minutes, you go through an Ultradian dip. What happens in that dip? And this is another thing I explain to people on the study. You detoxify, cells replicate and divide, nasal dominance switches from right to left and left to right, brain dominance switches. There's all these things that go on in the body during the dip that you naturally get tired. We're not biphasic, right? We're supposed to take little naps and even little rests during the day, during the 5 to 20 minute dip of the Ultradian trough. Well, if you've been given a diagnosis like chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia or any of these diagnoses of exclusion, where conventional treatments say you have to pace yourself, you have to monitor your energy, you have to do all that. Well, then when you go through that trough, that little dip, instead of just going and, laying in the shade or laying down or taking a little moment to meditate for 5 to 20 minutes, you think it's people with these diagnoses think that it's pathological because they're always on red alert for symptoms. They're taught to monitor and manage their symptoms. So it's like, oh my gosh, I'm tired. So a regular, natural, biological rhythm that you're supposed to be tired during and answer the call to go kind of chill out for a little bit, they go on red alert. So not only do the dips get dippier, because now and on top of all of this other stuff that the body has to do during the trough, now you're adding a fight or flight response, as you're engaging the sympathetic nervous system during the trough and taxing the poor body. So the dips get dippier and the recovery out of them comes longer. And then it's a vicious cycle because now it looks pathological. And that's why so much of this is based on perspective and also helping people to see that your thoughts are subjective. Your experience of tiredness may look pathological, but it's the same level of tiredness as every other human being is experiencing, and as a natural biological rhythm.
And it's your experience of that you're creating this sympathetic response because of your previous, your priors, right?
Yeah.
And that's what becomes a really big challenge.
Yeah. So back to what I was saying about the challenge of helping people to not be afraid of their thinking once they see that that's where it's coming from.
Mm.
What I often say is you're not looking for the absence of tiredness or the absence of symptoms. You're looking for the feeling of relief that it's not your job to do anything about it, because that stuff settles on its own and it takes a while. You're just looking for the feeling of relief. Oh, I'm okay. I'm waking up to this panic I have because I'm tired. I'm just going to be free with the feeling of tiredness.
This is
And
your fuck it moment, basically, right? This
yeah,
is your freedom. This is what
yeah,
you felt when you had your own experience.
yeah. And the feeling of tiredness does not mean you don't have energy to do the things you need to do. That was another key thing. Energy and tiredness are kind of mutually exclusive. And, but if you're supposed to monitor your tiredness, you're going to think, oh, that means I don't have energy.
Right. And it's that hypervigilant aspect of things that I see so commonly in patients that have, chronic complex medical illness. They come in with their huge paragraphs of their issues, their long list of supplements, the 13 doctors that they've seen that they've tried. And, I feel for these people, right? And it's really not, it's not an easy situation. And when I see this, when somebody's coming to see me initially, then I know if they haven't addressed this, at least this hypervigilance aspect of things, that sympathetic dominance is going to significantly handicap or mitigate or prevent them from getting to where they want to go. The question is why they have the sympathetic dominance and what's the best way in to get them to really sort of start understanding that if they can balance their autonomic nervous system, they're going to feel so much better and they don't have to control everything in the process, right?
Yeah. And also what you just said there, they don't have to actually, not only do they not have to balance it, it's impossible for them to do it. It happens all on its own when you kind of get out of the way. And for many people, it happens quite quickly when they can see, oh, and I think part of that, Scott, is showing people the moments in their life, examples, having them find examples of times in their life when they were at peace, when they had peace and well-being, exclusive of the absence of symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great. And then, a big part of this for a lot of people is the big T and little T's of trauma too, right? And I think what I've found over the years is that it's very difficult for patients to bring that together instead of why they're hypervigilant overall and like going back to some of that. But what is your experience maybe when you're doing the study, and personally, it sounds like you've done some of your own work. Like what's the role here of psychological care? Having a study where you give people this capacity to think and give this space is fantastic, but this also can lead sometimes to people who feel more unstable in some ways because they have to address some of the other things that have been underlying for a long time.
It's providing the space for them to see that it's normal to be hypervigilant and human and have trauma and to think it's your job and to slip back into that. There was this one woman on the study. It was, she was in the control group. So she happened in the second 8 weeks and she would put up a fight on the group calls. It was always like, yeah, but that won't work for me. Yeah, but, and always kind of like, and my partner, John, and I were always like, what is it? What is it about? I'll say, call her Susie. So we decided to do an extra little coaching call with her because it was like the other people on the study were kind of getting it and having their own breakthroughs. And then it would kind of like, she was providing a contrast. Let's just say she was.
That's a very nice way of saying it. I had other words in my brain for,
but that's okay.
Yeah, totally.
But that's, you asked, how do you hold, I also hate, the holding space for people. You have to provide a gentle environment where they can wake up to the reasons they're identified with their illness. Like the task which hinders your task is your task.
Yes. Yeah.
So John and I got on a call with Susie and we're like, we just noticed that in the group calls, you're always kind of like putting up blocks. Because all these people are having these breakthroughs and whatever, and you're saying, well, that won't work for me. And I have, double chronic fatigue and double, like whatever. These are all the reasons won't work for me.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
But also knowing that she desperately wants it to. And so John asked, did you notice that you kind of put up this? And we gave her some examples. She's like, yeah, I guess I do. He's like, well, why don't you, we talked a little bit, like, let's regroup tomorrow. Go and think about it. Don't try to figure it out. Just, you've recognized that that's what's happening, and we'll regroup tomorrow and you tell us what comes of it. So he got on the phone again. She's like, you're taking away my no. And what it was, she was the oldest of 8 kids. Everybody, like the matriarch of the family. So she raised all of her younger siblings because the parents both were. I might be botching this story, but it's still good. It still gives the reasons. And she's like, she was not allowed. She wouldn't allow herself to say no because, like me, if I say no to people, if I disappoint people, then people won't like me and I'll be left behind. She made up in her head that if she stood up for herself and her own wants and needs and her own, whatever, that she wouldn't be able to say no. But when all of her siblings were coming to her, Susie, can you do this? You got to take care of mine. She'd say, I have chronic fatigue. I can't. She's like, you're taking away my security blanket. And so we said, what if it wasn't as scary as you think it is to disappoint people and say no? She's like, no, I'm not ready. And she flat out said, no, I need my chronic fatigue. That was huge. And it took her like 6 months longer. I think she was one of the kind of latent, but she showed up to every call. She would still listen, but she didn't put up the blocks because she saw why she needed the diagnoses.
Interesting.
And eventually she would, and this is for a lot of people who, whether it's hypervigilance for what people think of you or hypervigilance for symptoms, there's obviously crossover, but those are kind of the two main categories of hypervigilance, which creates the oxidative stress, and the overengaged psychology, which prevents healing or causes symptoms. So when people see that that's what they're doing, sometimes they continue the behavior, they continue the hypervigilance or the people pleasing or whatever, but now they're watching themselves do it. And just continuing the behavior while watching yourself, I wonder next time if I did say no or did dip my toe into, or just even put up a little argument, what would happen? And they get braver. And the more they get braver, the dirty little secret is, in order to, like Sydney Banks, who kind of came up with the 3 principles understanding that is discussed early in the study, that's kind of laid out what it is and definitions are proposed. He said that if people could just learn to not be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. And that's it. It's like this big rat screen, like at, you ever been to Universal Studios? Is that Universal Studios or Disneyland, the Indiana Jones? It's the paint, it's throwing the paint over the invisible man. But so the Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom ride, you get in this car and it forces you through these dark, this cavern and around turns and stuff like that. And there's this place in the ride where there's this screen. And on the screen is a projection of rats with beady eyes, and they're moving all over the place. And it's just like at the car wash when you were a kid, they had those flaps that would go. So it looks like a solid wall full of rats that you're about to go through.
Yeah.
And everybody's like Fred Flintstone sticking out is not, no, the rats. I'm going to disappoint people. That's another symptom. People won't like me. I'm going to be left alone. My symptoms are going to get worse. I'm going to die, whatever. All of the rat screen. And then something in life you can only, like, I'm going to read this book to get rid of the rats. I'm going to take this course or this supplement or go to this 13th doctor to get rid of the rats. And then life, as it does, pushes you through and you're like, oh my gosh, it's never as bad as you think it will be.
Never.
There's always resources, or not. It might be as bad as you think it will be. What mitigates the badness of it, though, is you know what to do in the moment. And when Susie saw that it's just a rat screen, she's making up how scary it would be. And maybe her siblings won't like her for a while, or maybe her friends who she says no to will drop off. What a relief. Because you're not their friend anyway. They're friends with somebody you're making up. Yeah. And to maintain that made up persona takes a lot of energy.
Yeah. And I love that you brought it also to the biochemistry for people and talking about the hypervigilance and the oxidative stress, the sympathetic dominance. I'm not sure how much familiarity you have with like the world of psychedelics and the world of that's going on there. I just know that, over the last several years, knowing that these are available in certain instances for, for patients. It's been, pretty transformative to be able to do that kind of therapy at the same time as creating more of a physiologic shift that's happening at the same time to help them open up creativity, open up new neural connections overall they wouldn't have been able to do as easily. So have you had any experience with that or any thoughts about the uses of psychedelics in this world?
Not well. I mean, I have. I actually applied for the California Institute for Noetic Studies. I wanted to learn how to be a researcher and a facilitator and stuff. That actually never happened. But the point of that is I'm fascinated because, what we do at some point can happen in 8 weeks if people have an insight. It seems like ketamine therapy has an instant reset for some people.
It can, yeah. And MDMA and even psilocybin and these other ones where you can see rapid shifts because you're opening up the capacity to down regulate the major problem area in the brain, if you want to call that, which is the default mode network, right? The default mode network, the DMN, is where we have those stories, those loops, those things that I have to be, I need to be, I am, I always, it's like you're the sort of center of your, quote unquote ego as well. So if you can just dampen that down dramatically and then create opening to have these kinds of conversations, I think it's a fantastic combination of how to really do things. And that's really what I see being most transformative as so fast for a lot of the people that I work with. Yeah.
And I think it's, so one more metaphor and how to explain how this works and kind of brings all of it together was, whatever kind of medicine modality you're using or your practitioner is facilitating for you at the time. And this is kind of brings us full circle to what we talked about. You can put in hyperbaric oxygenation therapy. You could put in supplements. You can put in testing. You can do all this understanding. You can go on vacation, mindful-based meditation, whatever. You can fill the bucket. But if your bucket has a foundational leak in your understanding that your experience is coming from your thinking and that it's going to settle kind of on its own and it's designed to settle on its own, and there's lots of little baby holes in the bucket that stem from that, you're always going to be filling the bucket. So foundationally, or at least something that should be going on at the same time, whether it's through psychedelic therapy or 3 principles-based therapy as I utilize or mindful-based meditation, whatever, understanding what the leaks are in your particular bucket. So I like psychedelic therapy puts you in front of the rat screen in a very, another metaphor, puts you in front of the rat screen in a very safe, controlled, instantaneous environment kind of. So you're not standing at the precipice of this scary thing you have to go through for years and years and years until you see, oh, it's safe to go through. It all happens at once and kind of resets that. What do you call it? The autonomic dysregulation from repeating those patterns over and over again.
What's really happening there, with the decent amount of the psychedelics, is that it's allowing you to experience that experience, but without the emotional attachment to it. Yeah. So you're able to have that, like the rat screen as you described it, all the rats kind of coming at you, but okay, there's rats, whatever, and then you're able to see the stories that you've created and why this is so emotionally attaching or emotionally triggering for you, but then realizing that it doesn't have to be because you're able to kind of work through that. So I love the metaphors, Karen. I love the arc of this. And as we approach the end of the podcast, I want to reiterate how important this conversation is. If you're a clinician working with patients or clients, having the aspect be a big aspect of what you do. It doesn't have to be what you do personally, what you do in your clinical practice, but understanding that if your patients have significant psychology that's preventing them from healing, preventing them from downregulating that vigilance, that a lot of the things that you're going to try to do with them is just not going to work.
You're just filling a leaky bucket.
Exactly. And I've had to, really be very clear with a couple of my patients over the years, especially over the last couple, that I don't think I can help them, and I don't feel like they really can make the changes that they want to make until they can really work on, of course, not work on in the same sense of becoming more hypervigilant about it, but address the psychosocial emotional aspects of things overall.
Yeah, I love that. It actually kind of, doing this work kind of flips, you can give somebody even mindful-based meditation or something like that, but if it becomes another thing that they have to do in order to get better, you're just creating another cycle of hypervigilance. Whereas if they kind of do this work however they do the work, whether it's the kind of work that I hopefully will start doing again with people, or psychedelic therapy, or whatever that kind of plugs the holes in the bucket, then it becomes, and they have freedom with their symptoms and freedom with, it becomes not, I have to do this in order to be okay. It becomes, how good can it get?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I love it. Well, Karen, I asked the same question at the end of all of our podcasts, actually. This podcast is called the Smarter, Not Harder podcast. And so we ask all of our guests at the end 3 ways to live smarter, not harder. And this can be related to our conversation today. It also be related to some of the other work that you're doing and that we're going to, of course, highlight before we go. But personally, professionally, otherwise, 3 ways you feel all of us or most of us can live smarter, not harder. Any ideas?
Yeah. I would say one is to fire yourself from things that aren't your job.
I love that. I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And usually, when something's not your job because you're thinking about it all the time, and you can't control your digestion. You can't heal your wounds. You can provide an environment to like sweeten the terrain for it to go better, but don't stress yourself out about things that aren't your job. Building a business is not supposed to be hard. I love Derek Sivers. He created CD Baby. It's either a hell yes or a no. I'm not 100%. I'm not that great at that. I still have a bit of an addiction to martyrdom. I'm going through rehab right now.
Welcome to the club.
But it's a very good guiding light. I think my word for God is George. And I think George puts out, he makes the things you're supposed to do, you're meant to do, feel effervescent.
Okay. Your word for God is George? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not always. Sometimes it's God. Sometimes it's the universe. Sometimes depending on how nebulous I'm feeling. But if I just need a conversation with, all that is, I call him George.
Okay. I dig it. I love it. So I think that was 2. Do you have a third one that comes to mind?
There is a gap between who we truly are and who the world convinces us that we ought to be. And the gap, a collapsed gap, is how we're meant to live. And I'll be working my whole life to collapse the gap. But when you hold it open and hold yourself away from who you truly are, in the gap is inflammation and depression and sadness and despondency and all of the things. And my puddle of snot and tears moment was a gap collapsing moment, and recognize that it's innocent. We all do it because we don't want Ankh to kick us out of the tribe to hold our gap open because that's hardwired into our DNA. But you're really safe to at least experiment with closing the gap and seeing who you truly are. Even if you're just witnessing yourself hold it open. There's a whole couple more hours about the gap that I could do, but yeah, close the gap.
Collapse the gap. I think that maybe that's the title of this particular podcast. Well, Karen, thanks so much. I know that you spent a lot of time interviewing. I know, you're a little nervous to start, but this is a fantastic way to kind of get your feet wet more in the podcast scene on the other side. You're up to so many good things. Tell everybody what you're doing now. And, I know you and I and our team, Smart Not Hard, is also collaborating with you too. So talk a little bit about that if you can.
Right. Well, it's perfect segue because I really appreciate that you are giving me this opportunity to kind of jump back into this research and talk about it more. I've been called to so many times since 2021 when I started Renegade. Renegade is an online continuing education platform for nurses and allowing nurses to earn continuing education credit for ways that they're naturally inclined and enjoy learning. We call it edutainment, namely podcasts.
Yes, it's amazing.
We started one. Proof of concept. Nurses love to learn this way. They can do, listen to one of our podcasts, do a quick quiz. That worked. So now we're inviting in other people like you that have like fantastic educational content and all these great guest speakers. So nurses listening to any podcast on the RNA platform can listen and earn CE credit. And it's really simple and it's fun. We call it edutainment.
This is a fantastic idea, and to have the capacity for nurses, really any specialty, hopefully more will do this, where you can just listen to a podcast, answer a couple questions, and then you're on your way. And then you just gave me credit. It's pretty cool. So I think it's a fantastic platform. I know it's growing. I know you're doing other things with the platform.
Yeah, especially when we're inviting on people like you, and the Smarter Not Harder podcast. And, as long as it ticks all of the qualifying boxes for the California State Board of Registered Nursing, whatever qualifies as continuing education, we're good to go. It's a great way to learn. So thank you for your participation, because of course, when you bring audiences like yours to our renegades, then more and more nurses get to find out about your content and your work, as well as all the other people on that platform. So it's all boats rise.
I love that. That's what I was thinking. So where do we find more about it? What's the website, details, socials, things like that?
Yeah. So nurses are renegade.pro, but any allied health profession, can go there, and we've kind of like vetted podcasts that qualify as continuing education.
Right.
So anybody can go there, renegade.pro. You register, you give your license, and then you're kind of directed to the platform where all the podcasts and the quizzes and all that stuff. But it's, an hour-long podcast. You finish that, and it takes 5 minutes to do the quiz and evaluation. You get your continuing education credit that's stored on the thing, and you can print it out. So thanks for giving me the opportunity not only to talk about the research, but talk about our renegade, and for nurses listening to this. Appreciate it.
It's amazing. Well, Karen, thanks so much for your time. I look forward to continuing to work with you and learn from you and spread the good word for nurses and everybody else out there. So thanks everybody for listening today, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Smarter Not Harder podcast, where we give you 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. And this episode was chock full of information, as they all are. Clinically, though, such an important episode. If we can't get people out of fight or flight, they're not going to heal. If we can't address some of the psychosocial, emotional aspects of healing, people will not heal. No matter how many supplements, no matter how many products and exercises and lifestyle maneuvers you do, it's just not going to happen. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did with Karen DiMarco. Check out her work at Renegades, please. If you like this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe below so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.